Admittedly, I didn't know what to do next. I knew I had a variety of options to choose from, avenues to explore based on what Sheik had told me. Considering that I was basically leading a one-man revolution against an evil king, I wanted advice on what to do, but Impa hadn't come back from the graveyard yet. In order to keep my mind occupied, I decided to stop in at the newly relocated shooting gallery in Kakariko. Much like what I experienced in the Forest Temple, well... I was an expert. At Navi's behest, I decided to head up Death Mountain. She reminded me of what Gabora had told us, about how the cloud over the mountain reflects the state the mountain is in, but in these times, the mountain was restless, and it made me worried about Darunia. What could have possibly happened to him in the 7 years I was gone? My return to Goron City wasn't nearly as active as the Kokiri forest was. The city was empty, even quieter than the first time I came here during the Dodongo incident. The city was almost completely bare of life, and it became apparent to me that the Gorons weren't simply in hiding. After I had discovered that Darunia was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. You see, though the game had him just rolling around aimlessly, the young Goron I encountered was hiding out, the only one left in Goron City. When I left myself exposed, he sprang out into the open and attacked me. He didn't settle down until I gave him a shock, as it were. Needless to say, I was surprised to hear his name. Granted, I was somewhat flattered that Darunia named his son after me, though I'm personally glad that I don't know the details of where this kid came from. Anyways, news about the dragon in the Fire Temple, brought to life by GanonGhidorah, had me worried. The idea that the intent was to have the creature eat the Gorons was quite alarming. From what the kid explained, Darunia and the Gorons had defied GanonGhidorah's rule and were plotting to overthrow him. When GanonGhidorah found out, he raided Goron City while Darunia was off attempting to recruit help. All of the Gorons were now imprisoned in the Fire Temple, and GanonGhidorah was going to feed them to the dragon to set an example for all in Hyrule who would challenge him, so of course I was going to help. The kid gave me the Goron tunic. Darunia had fashioned it intentionally for me from Dodongo hide so that it would be tough and fire resistant. Not an easy thing to make or buy at a local shop. The kid told me that in spite of everything, Darunia always believed I'd come back one day, knowing that I'd be ready and willing to help them. This strengthened my resolve to help my sworn brother and save the Gorons. Though I must confess, I don't think red is my color. Look good either way, though. Part of me wondered just how long Sheik was here waiting for me. Without a Goron tunic, I might add. Also, there were no songs that Sheik taught me to get into the temples. I didn't need them. He was just there to give me advice about what I would need to do, and what I would soon face when I went into the temple. I don't know if that fire was Sheik's doing, or if it was just an incredibly convenient coincidence. Either way, the game just set a wooden rope bridge on fire and it doesn't seem concerned. The Fire Temple was not like the Forest Temple. It was much more direct and straightforward. The game's main action was to have the player scour all over the place trying to free the Gorons. In truth, they were all gathered up in one giant cell, but there was no discernible way to open it. It was only accessible by the dragon when it was getting ready to eat. I wasn't strong enough to break the bars of the cell. I needed a much more powerful weapon if I was going to get them out. And I had to hurry, because from the depths of the temple, I could hear the dragon's roars. It had woken up. Seeing Darunia again was a treat, not just at seeing another old friend, but one who actually recognized me this time. He played a much more important role than the game depicts here. Like the game says, he went off to face the dragon alone, and beseeched me to rescue the other Gorons. Though he didn't have the Goron hero's hammer, he was still a formidable fighter. If it wasn't for Darunia holding the creature off, I might have been too late. Granted, I didn't want to leave the dragon to him, but I had to rescue the Gorons. The Flame Dancers were some of Ganondorf's more unique servants. Definitely a step up from the usual fare that I had been dealing with along the way. I take it that since it was clear that Ganondorf was watching me, he felt the need to step up his game to test my skills. Not that I wanted to entertain him, but I can't help but sense that, of the ones I encountered, they were guarding something important. Something they needed to destroy before I got to it. The Megaton Hammer, legendary weapon of Darunia's ancestor. It is said to command a great deal of strength to wield. I didn't find it in a chest. It was instead displayed proudly as part of a statue. The carving was of the legendary Goron hero, wielding the hammer in one hand. The handle easily slid out just in case future generations would need it, but I found it to be difficult to lift. I wouldn't be able to hold it with one hand like its previous owner had. I had to use both arms to keep it steady, much to my own dismay. But I soon got a taste for how powerful this thing was. I realized that it was the key that I had been looking for. If you hadn't discerned it by now, the metal bars of the cell had rusted shut and were immovable, but the Megaton Hammer was powerful enough to flatten them with ease. The Gorons were grateful and relieved to have been freed. Some of them even recognized me when they saw me. The Dodongo Buster had returned to save them. Most were concerned about where Darunia was, and I realized that he'd been fighting the dragon all this time. While the Gorons escaped out of the temple, I went back to the Dragon's Keep, where Darunia went. I was certain that the dragon was guarding the portal into the evil realm. A showdown was inevitable. When I found the proud Goron leader, he was brought low. I had never seen him like this. He was on the ground, bruised, slashed, and in pain. As a Goron, he was almost entirely heat-resistant, which was good, because he was now laying in one of the vents of lava. I tried to rush to his aid, only for him to suddenly slip beneath the surface with a gasp. He was dragged underneath. I could feel the vibrations under my feet, the signs of a struggle taking place. Darunia was eventually flung from the vent from the other side of the platform. I quickly rushed to his side to help him. He was barely conscious, but alive, and he smiled seeing me. But he was in no condition to use the hammer. The magma began to erupt, and Volvagia came forth, revealing herself to me fully. An enormous lava-swimming worm, scales that glowed like molten rock, thick obsidian armor plating over her head, and 3 long braids of amber hair flowing like fire from beneath 2 ram's horns on her head. She circled around in the air for a moment, spewing fire about the area before diving back under. With Darunia hurt, it was up to me. A combination of the Megaton Hammer and the Goron's knife managed to damage the creature, but she quickly saw through this and changed up her strategy. Diving under the lava, she feinted me into going to the wrong vent. When I stepped over her true hiding place, she sprang forth quickly, sending me flying and knocking the giant's knife from my hands. She quickly circled around and grabbed me before I could recover. She carried me up into the air, slashing and biting at me. I fought back, holding off her jaws with the hammer and punching at her sensitive eyes. It wasn't long before she tossed me back onto the ground. The giant's knife was out of reach, and soon she slithered towards me. She would have blasted me with her flamethrower if not for Darunia. Her tail passed by where he had been recovering, and he managed to grab her and hold her off. Her momentary confusion and anger at being seized allowed me to recover. I quickly drew the hammer and the Master Sword. Darunia recounted his impression to me later that I had wielded the hammer with one hand, like a true Goron hero. I don't remember doing it. All I remember was bringing the hammer down on Volvagia's head one last time, fully shattering her armored plating. And when she was exposed, I drove the Master Sword directly into her forehead, right between her evil eyes. It seemed fitting that the Master Sword do it. When it was all over, the portal revealed itself, but I was concerned with getting Darunia to safety. After what happened with Saria, though, I had sort of come to expect it. The portal reacted to Darunia and was purified. The power of his awakening seemed to heal his wounds. We were both taken to the Chamber of Sages where Saria greeted us. I admit I was happy at this revelation, proud knowing that someone as great and courageous as Darunia was a sage. My friends, everyone that I had come to know along the way, were all coming together to help me. The game seems to imply that the sages had to stay in the Temple of Light. While it's true that they stayed there after we separated, it was more to commune with their new powers and to properly seal the outflows of the evil realm per temple. But they were capable of leaving the chamber when they needed to. While the chamber was our official headquarters, our unofficial meeting place was Impa's house in Kakariko, and later, Lon Lon Ranch. But I won't get ahead of myself here. I just wanted you to know that the sages, my friends, played a more active role in these events. I found it amusing that despite their contrasting appearances, Darunia and Saria quite enjoyed each other's company. Particularly when he discovered that she was the one who composed his favorite song. If I could give a minor note here, there was no real qualifiable way to measure how much magic power a person has. The more magic spells I acquired and the more great fairies I met, the more my latent magical ability was drawn out. Though I must admit, the great fairy herself mentioned how impressed she was at the dormant power within me. I thought it was just because I was the hero of time. Not so. When I climbed back up Death Mountain to its peak, I realized how calm everything was. The first time I had done so since I was a child, and there was no quake or falling debris. It became apparent to me that Volvagia was the source of the mountain's eruptions. Ganondorf must have been attempting to revive her for a very long time. The Triforce made it possible. For the first time since my new quest began, I began to worry about how I was going to get it away from him. With the Triforce, he might as well be invincible, so I could only pray that the Master Sword truly could destroy any evil. Either way, the evil clouds covering Death Mountain had dispersed. I had awakened 2 sages and gained the powers of 3. I could feel myself getting stronger, and I was more determined than ever to see this through to the end. And because Darunia and Saria had become sages, I was almost certain of where I had to look for the next sage. But before I could get to that, I decided that I needed to take care of one last thing. I went back to Talon and told him that it was safe to return to Lon Lon Ranch. I was pleased to hear that the man vowed to turn over a new leaf, regaining some of his former glory of his days as a young man. Either way, I decided to report back to the Cuckoo Lady about the progress her pocket chick had made. I wasn't exactly anxious to take on another pet cuckoo. If the game hadn't made it clear, I don't have the best relationship with the little monsters. But Kojiro's beautiful color, coupled with the lady's insistence, was enough to get me to comply. The game doesn't mention it, but she also implored me to find her lost brother, wherever he was. She had been worried about him ever since he left town, and their father had yet to return as well. Moved by her plight, I agreed to find him and hopefully bring him back. I don't know why, but almost on instinct, I called her Anju, not even realizing I had done it. She looked confused, but laughed it off, mentioning that she had a distant cousin named Anju. There must have been some resemblance. Still, I didn't press the matter despite my confusion. As I was leaving Kakariko, I was stopped by an old man in a peddler's cloak. I didn't think much of him, but I didn't have any memory of seeing him here or in Castletown. He inquired of me about my quest. Something about his doublespeak made me believe that he was hinting at some greater wisdom. He sensed that on the horizon, Kakariko village would no longer be safe, and the people here would need a haven to flee to. It reminded me of what the Deku Tree Sprout had told me. I still needed to find a place for the Kokiri to go. The number of refugees was increasing, and at the old man's behest, I had to find some place soon. It didn't take me much of a search, either. I decided to stop at Lon Lon Ranch to check on everything. Ingo was done making trouble, and Talon was keeping to his word, working hard in the stables from now on. Milan would tell me that he would even stay up late to tend to the horses. It seemed like Lon Lon Ranch had become the safe haven that it once was, and that gave me an idea. It didn't take much convincing. Milan and Talon agreed to allow Lon Lon Ranch to be a safe haven for anyone in Hyrule. It would soon become headquarters for the resistance against Ganondorf, a meeting place for all the free peoples of Hyrule. I returned to the Kokiri forest to begin the preparations. That would take more convincing. Though they were all hesitant, the Kokiri were willing to listen to me. I was, after all, the one who made the monsters go away, and I had the Deku Tree Sprout's favor. But what was truly surprising was that Mido had emerged from the Lost Woods and vouched for me. He claimed that the woods were still not safe and convinced the others to trust me. The Kokiri began to pack up. It was requested of me that I go into the Lost Woods to find Fattah. She had become fascinated by the forest while I was gone, and she hadn't come back yet. Much to my surprise, when I entered the woods, Kojiro began to crow. I found his former master sleeping in the clearing nearby. He looked barely alive. He lit up at being reunited with his friend. This mushroom is proof, an ancient connection to Hyrule's past, a closely guarded secret. I was admittedly startled when I found Fattah waiting here in his place. Her demeanor was even creepier than when I knew her as a child. What wasn't depicted here is the fact that she, out of all of them, knew who I was enough to use my name. After taunting me about becoming a Stalfos, she began to giggle in a very unsettling way. All I could muster doing was to back away slowly until she vanished into the wind. I have my suspicions on Fattah's true identity, but nothing has ever been confirmed. Either way, I had fulfilled my promise to the Cuckoo Lady, and it was time to get back to work.